Good afternoon and welcome to the New South Wales Community of Policy Professionals webinar series. And my name is Louise Mamuni. I'm the host of this webinar today, and our topic is on a focus on practical skills and knowledge, business cases from good to great. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are meeting today, wherever you may be joining us from, and recognise that this land is, was and always will be Aboriginal land. As host of the meeting, I'd like to pass on my formal acknowledgement and respect to any elders, past, present or emerging, that may be joining us, and a warm welcome to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders joining us today. Our guests this afternoon are from New South Wales Treasury, and we have Tegan, an Associate Director, leading the implementation of outcome budgeting reform across the New South Wales public sector. She's served with the New South Wales Government since 2011, working on taxation, infrastructure and planning, social and community services and customer service. Prior to this, Tegan started her career at the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and in her private research, she specialised in public policy and program evaluation. She's got a passion for working with government and to maximise delivery of social and economic outcomes. Jarita is Principal Policy Analysis in the Centre for Evidence and Evaluation at Treasury, and she specialises in the areas of investment management, resource allocation, business case development. And her professional experience covers policy design, risk management, regulatory impact assessment, and good governance and health economics. So she's passionate, a passionate advocate for mental health and disability. She loves yoga and travel and has two small boys. So business cases are one of the tools used by the New South Wales Government to develop, assess and refine policy. The presentation today will explain the context and show how business cases help inform and guide decision making, use program or project logic, and provide practical guidance and introduce cost benefit analysis, as well as the links to evaluation. So I hope you pick up some useful tips and grow your understanding. After the main presentation, there'll be opportunity for you to ask questions, and we're also recording this webinar for current and future access. Jarita and Tegan, over to you.
Thank you, Louisa. And I'll just work out how to share my screen. Just one second. There we go. Can you see the presentation okay?
That's great, Tegan. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So as the title of this presentation suggests, we're here. Sorry, I just realised I probably haven't got my video on.
Tegan, I can't seem to see your presentation as of yet.
Okay.
Tegan, I can see you and I can see your presentation.
Okay. All right. Okay, I'll press on then in that case. So as the title of this presentation suggests, we're here to provide some guidance on developing really great business cases. Now that can sound like a pretty dry topic, but it is something which is really important and it's really fundamental to really good decision making. So I'll start off first and give you a bit more sort of the broader context that we work within when we're developing business cases, and then Yuri will take over to take you through a few more of the specifics of sort of what you need to do and considerations in actually developing business cases themselves. So if everyone's like me, you've probably been sitting at your desk at home for the last, I don't know, 6 hours without really moving. So I suggest that, particularly while I'm talking through some of the context considerations, you actually stand up and just move around while you're listening in. And then you can come back and take some notes probably a little bit later on. So move first, I think it's first things first, it's really important to understand some of the broader context and decision-making considerations. when you're putting up a business case, you need to be really cognizant of sort of who's actually going to be looking at it and what lens they're going to be applying when they're actually considering that business case. So obviously they will generally come to Treasury, and Treasury does often get a lot of jibes about being the gatekeepers to money or being the no people, saying no to business cases and no to new funding requests. But you do need to also consider some of the broader context of those decisions and those processes which take place. So looking at this slide, and I'll actually go from right to left, and starting with the democratic values. So this really is around the outcomes that we want to deliver. We need to be considering, I put this under democratic values basically because outcomes are really determined through what the people of New South Wales value. We need to think about what they value, what they want delivered, what the impacts are that we're trying to deliver for them. So that will be really the starting point of any decision-making process. Is this something which actually will factor into the priorities and values of people, which is really considered through the lens of the politicians that we're voting for? So Cabinet will make ultimate decisions and then ERC will make the ultimate funding decision from that. So we need to be making sure that they're tailoring really to that context. The next point here is the economic outlook. So we need to consider the productivity of the economy, which impacts on living standards, population growth, demographic changes, as well as participation and workforce trends. You know, these are kind of the broader context of which we're all delivering services. And they're really important because they inevitably link to both the funding envelope that we have to be able to allocate across the services, but they also really impact the extent and type of services that we need to deliver. From that, we then get our fiscal context. So this is really the one where Treasury really plays a major role in managing the state's fiscal strategy, which in its simplest terms means that we need to make sure we're managing the full range of expenses across the government with the revenues that we have available to pay for those. So the fiscal strategy is guided by the Fiscal Responsibilities Act, the objective of which is to maintain the state's AAA credit rating. And to do that, we need to show that we have really rigorous, well-considered, well-planned processes through our sort of resource allocation so that we have good trade-offs and a balance in kind of the short-term and long-term fiscal requirements. So they're really the high-level context setting that you need to be aware of when you're putting together a business case. The next one is around outcomes budgeting. So those, the economy, the fiscal, the outcomes, priorities are really high-level challenges that we need to factor in. But the outcomes budgeting framework really brings those all together and provides a really good, coherent, common framework for being able to manage resources, the decision making, and the reporting across government. So we're really quite lucky in New South Wales that we're now relatively advanced in implementing and utilising the outcome budgeting framework. And I'll just go quickly to give you a bit of an overview of kind of what that framework is and how it's being applied at the moment. So in a nutshell, it's a process of allocating resources in a way that really optimises the delivery of real outcomes for the people of New South Wales. So it considers three main components. The first here is that green cog, which is the performance monitoring and reporting. So in order to understand and track performance across the sector, we've made sure that we've been setting some really good performance frameworks across each of the clusters and then against each of the activities that each of the clusters is doing. So that provides constant approach to being able to monitor how well we're actually delivering the outcomes and objectives that we're trying to deliver. And it feeds back into being able to continuously improve the services that we're delivering, as well as prioritising across the different outcomes. The next component is the outcome and business planning. And that's really like a strategic document held by each cluster, which articulates how exactly they're going to deliver that performance against the outcomes, the types of programs that will be delivered, and then how they'll actually manage and monitor and improve on those programs that they'll be delivering. And finally, we've got the outcome budgeting cog here, which really informs and influences the budget decisions within a cluster, but as well as across the sector, to make sure that we're balancing resources appropriately to maximise sort of the value that we can get from every dollar. So one of the really key things to this framework is that it shines a light on the performance that we're achieving across all of the state's resources, and not just on the kind of incremental resources which are being sought through like a business case process, for example. So when you're developing a business case, you need to be considering this broader context as well. You need to be considering how that business case will actually factor into the broader strategy for delivering a particular outcome, and making sure that that impact of the business case is really clearly articulating what the additional value of it will be. So this slide really just gives you another demonstration of the sort of shift in thinking that we're now going through as we're implementing the outcomes budgeting framework. Previously, we might have looked at problems from more of an input sort of output perspective. You might have looked at something, and in this example, you might have looked at the approach and thought, okay, emergency departments are really busy places with lots of people. You know, how can we make them less busy? Or we'll just give them new funding and expand the emergency department. And that would be sort of an input-output approach. Instead, by taking an outcomes focus, outcomes sort of perspective, we're applying more of that human-centered design approach. So looking at what the impact is that we really want to be achieving, and then rolling that down to think, well, how can we deliver on that? What are all the different options, the different outputs that we can do, the programs we can deliver, and then building that back to then refining and making sure that the inputs that we're providing are specifically linked to the impacts that we actually want to have at the end. And then just briefly, just introduce you, this is essentially the outcome framework from a cluster perspective on how we're actually managing and monitoring that performance. And it really, as this image sort of suggests, it brings together that evidence and evaluation aspect from a really high level at the outcomes and outcome indicator level, as well as the program level. So I would hope that everyone would be aware that we've now got an agreed set of state outcomes. So the government's agreed to a set, there's 37 state outcomes which have been agreed, and they cut across the full range of activities across government, the full range of the programs across government. And each cluster will have an agreed set of outcomes. All of the cluster's activities are then mapped to these programs under each outcome. And those programs really articulate how the cluster is planning on supporting the delivery of that outcome. It's probably important here just to make the distinction there. The outcomes which are agreed, they're really quite high level and aspirational. There are instances where there are other exogenous factors which will impact on the delivery of that outcome. So for example, one of Treasury's outcomes is maintaining a strong, diverse economy. Obviously, that is quite a challenging thing through a pandemic. We've come into a recession, and so we need to recognise that some of those, the performance against those will actually be impacted by things outside of the control of government. However, the programs are things which are fully within the control of government. So they're the things that we're actually doing to support the delivery of particular outcomes. And so that's what's measured then through the program performance measures. We need to check how much what we're delivering is actually effectively delivering the outcomes, whether we're doing it efficiently or effectively, and whether we're doing it equitably as well. So underneath each of the programs, we'll potentially have a range of initiatives, or a program might be sort of sufficiently small that it's actually only one type of activity or one initiative in itself. And this is primarily where you're likely to have the specific detailed evidence and evaluation activities, such as through CBAs or business cases. And that's really where you need to be doing a lot of detailed analysis and linking through the objectives of that initiative up through the objectives of the program and linking that really clearly to the outcome that's trying to be achieved. So through that, you need to consider whether it is the most efficient, effective, and equitable approach to being able to deliver that initiative in support of the outcome. So I can't stress that enough. It really needs to have that integration through up to the state outcome level to make sure that we're all really prioritising and aiming to try and deliver the impacts which we've agreed are sort of the desired primary goals of government. So that's really the context, and I'll hand over to Yuri now, just so that she can take you through the specifics of how you need to develop that business case. But I would encourage you to then to keep considering this broader context every time you come to develop a business case. Make sure you're thinking about the broader context, thinking about the different factors which can apply at different instances. I'll hand over to Yuri.
Thank you so much, Tegan, for such an outstanding overview of outcome budgeting, which is a massive reform initiative, and you managed to provide such an outstanding overview in such a short time. It's such a massive piece of work. Hello, everyone, and a pleasure to meet you all. My name is Yuri Zanelli, and I work in Center for Evidence and Evaluation. And as Louisa and Tegan suggested, or introduced, I will be talking to you today about business cases, and I'd like to put a bit the topic of business cases and CBAs and evaluation in the context of the area that we currently operate in Treasury, which is Center for Evidence and Evaluation. So as the name suggests, we are all about evidence, and to put that thing into context is how this evidence basically supports outcome budgeting and other government initiatives, and why it does matter. So to start, evidence-based decision-making is rooted in the practice of medicine and clinical sciences. And what it means, it's the consensuous, explicit, and judicious use of current best evidence in making decisions about the care of individual patients. The application of evidence is linked to superior outcomes in medicine and less risk in obtaining these outcomes. And similarly, in social sciences, we use evidence to improve outcomes. So just as an example, when Washington State started utilizing cost-benefit analysis in year 2000 in order to prioritize investment for juvenile justice programs, they realized that by 2009, they had achieved an 18 percentage point reduction in juvenile arrests compared to the US average. And why they did so is they applied evidence. They used the evidence to understand what works and what doesn't, and to basically invest in the right initiatives and allocate resources in the right areas. However, the use of evidence, probably you are just like me asking, why don't we do it more often, and why don't we do it better if it indeed improves outcomes so significantly? Obviously, there are many barriers to the application of evidence, and as much as we'd like to be naive and not think that even in medicine these barriers are there and they are real, we know that often decisions are based on superseded knowledge gained in school, or long-standing but never proven traditions, certain patterns that are ingrained in experience, and we, as humans, usually tend to converge to methods that we know we are most skilled to apply. So just like that, also in social sciences, in economics and management, the use of evidence basically faces a lot of barriers. But what we try to do in Center for Evidence and Evaluation is always to seek new knowledge and insight from both inside and outside the organizations, and keep updating our methods, keep updating our assumptions, the knowledge and the skill base, so that ultimately we can deliver on the best of those outcomes. And Tegan, if you could help me to the next slide, please. In order to do so, we have developed a set of policies to support that quest for evidence. These are obviously there are different theories, and because this is a community of policy professionals, you will probably know even better than I do, why policies exist, etc. But one theory that I find quite useful, that works for me, is to think of policies as elements or initiatives that address problems. I don't like to think of policies, as something that we put out there to, for the sake of developing policies. We usually try to address a problem that we've identified exists, and that problem exists in a specific context. So it presents challenges and opportunities. It involves a multitude of agents, all of us in this scenario, because we are all applying these policies. And of course, it requires a certain response that we come together to address. So these policies are, in essence, part of the investment management framework that we use in Treasury, and they are there to identify what's the best evidence. How can we generate the best evidence to support an investment decision? And so I would like perhaps to talk to you very briefly about these policies today and introduce the business case guidelines, the monitoring and evaluation process, and the CBA guide, which are all policies managed by the Center for Evidence and Evaluation. Outside of these, there are, of course, other policy areas strictly linked to the investment process, but I've decided to keep that out of scope today for the purpose of this presentation. If you help me to the next slide, Tian. We have obviously certain methods to apply these policies. These usually are based on a risk assessment and some dollar threshold to define the scale and the requirement of that evidence based on these two parameters. These elements are currently under review in Treasury, and they will be updated shortly. One process that probably you have come across that is quite essential to this policy process, to this investment sort of process, is the assurance process, which is a policy run by my colleagues in financial management policy and analytics, and you probably have come across that, the gateway process, which applies a very similar approach, both in terms of combining risk and dollar threshold applied to investment proposals. If I go to the next slide, I'd like to introduce the first policy, which is the business case guidelines. I was asked to take you through some of the policy content, and this is an area I'm very passionate about. I supported the development of this policy, which was issued in late 2018. So a business case is, in essence, a documented proposal to meet the government's objectives, and it is used to inform investment, policy, and regulatory decisions. It contains analysis of a problem that we are trying to solve, but also of the costs, benefits, risks, assumptions associated with that, and the different policy options. More in practice, a business case is also a management tool. It's actually a living document which is developed over time and reflect the priorities of different investment stages, something that I'm going to take you through shortly. In essence, it contains 5 key questions. Have I got what is the problem that I'm trying to address? So what is the need or the problem that I'm trying to address? Is there a clear rationale for government action which addresses a community need or an identified problem or priority or state outcome? What is the evidence in terms of cost-benefit analysis that supports achieving that objectives, both in terms of cost and benefits, in order to maximize the social welfare and deliver value for money? How am I going to finance that sort of solution that I've identified, or that suite of solutions? Is there evidence that the appropriate options are financially viable? How do I have the capacity in the agency and the capability required to procure, implement, and maintain and deliver, realize the benefits that I've anticipated from the options that I've identified? or do I need to, have I got that sort of capability in-house, or do I need to go and outsource it? And ultimately, what's the confidence that I can provide in delivering that solution? What are the governance and the systems in place that will support me in delivering the preferred options that I've identified? So these are like the 5 key components of a business case, and I think those are quite universally applicable in every area of our life. If we say, what's the problem that I'm trying to address? What are the costs and the benefits of each option and alternative? Can I afford it? And can I deliver it? And if I were to deliver it successfully, what do I need to do so? If I can go to the next slide, the way the business case policy works is through different developmental stages. This is to ensure that there is scalability and better alignment between the proponents and Treasury. So when I first joined Treasury to work on this policy piece, one of the key areas of feedback that were provided by users of this policy is that Treasury and cluster engagement is very poor, and it's very poor early on in the development of business cases. And therefore, today I'd like to sort of focus on how we've tried to address this sort of engagement to be better and to be earlier, to be happening earlier and in a more effective way. So I'd like to focus on the 2 stages of the business case that usually don't get much attention, which is stage 0 and stage 1. And usually what we see is there is a lot of attention at detailed business case stage because that's where the funding decision is made. However, all these other stages that lead to the development of a detailed business case, ultimately, I see them as a key input in improving ultimately the business case process and the final product. So they are very essential stages. If those are set up not correctly, I do believe that it undermines the detailed business case massively. So just to focus on the first stage, which is stage 0, it's called problem definition. And this could be, this area is basically focused on the case for change. And ultimately, it's asking the question, what is the problem that I've identified? And is that problem sort of requiring government intervention, and why? And how does that problem fit within the broader context that Tigran clearly explained? And what's the contribution of that problem to that broader context? And so this is a very important part of a business case, because I do find that if the case for change is not set up adequately, that undermines basically the quality of the business case altogether. And at this stage, we need to make sure to basically engage with as many stakeholders as possible, clarify what their expectations are, etc., and their understanding of this problem and of framing this problem. I'll talk more to this a bit later in the presentation. Stage 1 is a strategic business case stage. This is about identifying a suite of options that are feasible to solve the problem that we've all agreed is there and needs solving. And this stage is about applying specific methods like a rapid cost-benefit analysis or financial appraisal to basically go from a long list of options to a short list of options which are feasible to pursue further in more detail with more accurate evidence. And finally, the detailed business case. This is usually a stage of the business case where you've gone through basically a short list of options. You've identified that short list through strategic business case, and now you are like applying extensive analysis methods with better evidence, with better information to make it a robust case and to ask the questions, can I deliver this option in-house, or do I have to outsource it? What sort of procurement strategies am I going to follow? Is there enough market capability out there and capacity to deliver this service or this product? And what is the right governance arrangement I'm going to be putting in place to accompany the delivering of this proposal? If we go to the next slide, as trivial as it might sound, I'd like to spend a minute or two on this slide, because we all agree that we, on a daily basis, we face different sets of problems, and obviously these problems can range from very simple, like following a recipe for a cake, to very complicated, like sending the rocket to the moon, and to very complex, like raising a child. I know all about the last one because I'm raising two young kids. I think the key differentiator between these different typologies of problems is the level of uncertainty, and basically the level of uncertainty in delivering the outcomes. So if you go from left to right, the level of uncertainty in delivering the outcomes increases. Less and less we have sort of, we can rely on expertise that guarantees success, and sort of an optimistic approach is possible, but is not always, it's possible, but is ultimately not always deliverable. Sort of we deal with problems that involve many unknowns, and based on the typology of problems that you are dealing with, then basically it requires a different strategy in how you are going to tackle that problem. And one method that I've seen applied in other jurisdictions, and increasingly so in New South Wales, is something that I really like, is the investment logic mapping. Tegan, if you could help me to go to the next slide. This is a method or a technique to ensure robust problem definition, and to ensure that before solutions are identified, we can all agree on, yeah, this is a problem we are dealing with. So I've put an example together, which is from a different jurisdictions and therefore a little bit less contentious. This is in another state. So they've identified a bottleneck with efficiency and responsiveness of justice services in a particular region. So the investment logic method, mapping method, has pulled different experts and non-experts together. And they're trying now to distill what they think the problem is. And so after they've workshopped this problem, they've landed to the fact that they think that 50% of the problem is driven by the fact that they don't have the ability to meet growing demand for court services, which causes a lot of delays and increased costs. 35% is due to the fact that the facilities are not contemporary and are undermining efforts to reduce reoffending, which is what they're trying to achieve. And 15% is due to the infrastructure being dated and not safe to be there. However, because in Treasury we look at different sort of policies and different investment proposals, sometimes what we see is my infrastructure is dated, and therefore I'd like some money to check, well, what is the actual problem that you are trying to identify, and to resolve? And in essence, what they've come up with is a suite of benefits that they are trying to achieve. So what it is that they want to achieve by addressing these problems. They are looking obviously to increase the efficiency of services, and they are looking to have more effective and responsive services. As mentioned, they are looking to reduce the reoffending rates, and also to improve the quality and the safety of service delivery. As mentioned, some of the infrastructure is not quite safe. So they've gathered all these experts, and they've asked questions around how they are going to be doing this. What's the evidence out there? What has worked in other jurisdictions? What's best practice? Is best practice feasible for us, or should we just look at improved practice? And so in this case, they have identified that providing additional space and some sort of reconfiguration of services is the way to go, but that this element needs to be supported with enhanced technology and by expanding capabilities for more targeted services response. And so finally, they've come to the solutions. And so the solutions don't just include one solution, they include a suite of solutions, and it's a mix of assets and some change management initiatives. So I really like this process because it really ensures that already at stage 0, all the people involved in that problem are listened to, and all the aspects that they bring that shed light on that problem are regarded and considered. And plus it provides, how can I say, a pathway for the future in terms of how to resolve these problems. If you go to the next slide, at the last business case community of practice, we had, which we, Centre for Evidence and Evaluation and Infrastructure in New South Wales, chaired together. We had a professor, former professor of UTS and a lead design thinker in Australia and internationally, Professor Sam Bukulo, explain different approaches to framing problems. And one of them is how can we use a design thinking to frame problems correctly? And so I think the first step to that is to understand what sort of problem you are dealing with, as mentioned before. And some problems are very well resolved with the usual plan and control type of method, but others require a different set of thinking. And so I really like this process. I'm happy to send through this slide if you wanted to hear more from this presentation. If you go to the next slide, I'm now going to be talking a little bit around stage 1, so the strategic business case. This is past the problem has been identified. Usually, this is a stage where we've all agreed this problem exists and it's worth pursuing, and we've all agreed what the root causes of that problem are, and now we are looking at different options to solving that problem. These options are quite refined, and usually what we recommend as part of this process is to organize one or more, if necessary, facilitated workshop session with key stakeholders, meaning authorizers, funders, users, customers, etc., and to basically agree on the investment objective, on the scope for change, etc., agree on the observable key success factors and outcomes from different perspectives, and agree on a strategic response, and then from there develop what is the service and what is its scale, what sort of options have I got to deliver it, and who is best suited to deliver it. Is it going to be in-house? Is it going to be delivered in one go, or is it going to be delivered in different stages? And for that, obviously, we highly recommend, again, the use of evidence, whether it's evaluation reports from previous projects that were successfully carried out or not successfully carried out, learnings, or whether it's consultation with subject matter experts, best practice solutions. What I do find useful in this instance is using also extreme options. So things that we know we are not going to go for, like a do minimum or a do maximum type of thing, because I think those basically define very clearly the boundaries of the different options that we are considering, and then everything else happens in between. And refining the options is the last step in this process, and this is about applying different methods like rapid cost-benefit analysis or financial analysis to really distill what are the options with the highest impact. And so this is a good segue to giving you a bit of a brief introduction. We go to the next slide, to the cost-benefit analysis. This is an appraisal and evaluation technique that estimates the cost, social, both economic, social, and environmental costs and benefits of a project or a program in monetary terms. And I'd like to emphasize this aspect because often there is a lack of insight into what CBA is actually about. And a lot of professionals think this is actually just focusing on the economic costs and benefits, but it's actually a very comprehensive type of analysis, which is much more comprehensive than just the economic factors, and it includes social and environmental costs and benefits. This is a method used to basically assess the merits of different significant government projects and programs, policies and regulation, and therefore it really supports us in prioritizing interventions and ultimately, allocating resources adequately. In terms of the key steps, Tigan, if you could help me to the next slide. The key steps of this process are outlined in the cost-benefit analysis guide, TPP 1703. And in our center, we've got massive expertise in this area. So if you have any questions specific to cost-benefit analysis, please feel free to reach out and we'll be able to support you. But in essence, as an overview, apologies. Apologies for that. Just kids coming back from school, as we all know. So, basically, the cost-benefit analysis starts with stating the objectives for the analysis and for the initiative, defining a base case and developing different options. Base case is usually a do minimum or business as usual type of option, and the trick of this analysis is basically in the comparability of this option to the other options that are being put on the table as feasible. Identifying and forecasting the costs and benefits. Obviously, we do this over a period and a time frame by this ultimately looking at expected value and discounting these. Valuing the costs and the benefits, we try to assign monetary values to the cost items and to the benefit items that we have identified. But also we include qualitative factors and distributional impacts because, as we know, especially when we're trying to solve complex problems, these will have different impact in different target groups and population groups, and that impact is probably going to be different. And so we would like to know who are we impacting and how much are we impacting these target groups. Assessing the risk and testing sensitivities. Obviously, we operate in an uncertain environment, and there is risks associated to all of these alternatives. Assessing the net benefits ultimately comes through deducting the net cost from the benefits, and reporting the results. Here, quite important, undertaking cost evaluation and understanding, the initiative ex ante. This is what was the key intention. These were the identified costs and benefits that we agreed on, but ultimately, what has been achieved after that initiative has been implemented. And the next slide, I'll focus a little bit. I think in the next slide, I think all I wanted to say is that CBA is an incredibly powerful method in understanding the overall net welfare effects to society of a policy or a program, and of course, including social, environmental, and economic impacts. And that also, it needs to be undertaken with considerations around the proportionality of the funding ask. So a rapid CBA would involve all these 9 steps, which I briefly outlined, but the supporting evidence and the degree of information and reliability of that information that we expected is going to be different for a 10 million proposal versus a 1 billion proposal. The next method I would like to talk to you about, Tigan, if you could go to the next slide, please. and then the one after next, is the evaluation planning. This is also a very important method and a policy that is currently under review by my colleagues Danielle Sprite and Raquel, who in our team. Planning for evaluation is obviously very good practice, considered good practice, as it allows to comprehensively investigate whether an initiative is ultimately achieving what it was designated to do. So whether it's achieving the intended outcomes. Evaluation planning starts with establishing a monitoring and evaluation framework at the initiative design stage and implementation. Then at appropriate stages of the investment life cycle, evaluation activities will undertake an in-depth investigation of the initiative's implementation. Basically, we would understand to support understanding whether ultimately the initiatives and those activities that we have undertaken have delivered the expected changes, if these changes led to an improvement to the well-being of the New South Wales community, and ultimately what are the overall costs and benefits associated with that initiative and its implementation. In terms of methods used for evaluation, obviously the logic model is a very powerful representation of how an initiative is intended to work. And ultimately, it sets the basis for an evaluation process. So it starts with the overall objectives. It identifies the different inputs necessary for that initiative, the different activities linked to it, the outputs, and then short-term outcomes, medium-term outcomes, long-term outcomes, and ultimately the benefit, which is the key component. I think we can go, we can skip this slide. There is an example here of how a good logic model should look like. I think that's going to be very useful for you if you wanted to have a look at it at a later stage, and we'll definitely going to be circulating these slides. Ultimately, Tegan, if you go to the very last slide, what I would like to say, and one more, please, is that wherever possible, you know, and especially during COVID-19, what we have realized is that to be able to design good policies and to be able to improve and sort of enhance the investment decision process through better evidence, we need user input, and without that user input, it does feel at times like we're back in time, driving on a horse and a little cart. And whereas where we would like to be is, you know, driving a Tesla and looking well ahead, and being environmental friendly and looking well ahead in terms of what are the community outcomes that we would like to achieve. So please feel free to reach out. We've got several community of practices. Alone in our team, there is 3, the CBA, the evaluation, and the business case community of practice. If you have ideas on things that are working well for you and that you'd like to share with other sort of groups of people and policy professionals, reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to hear from you and provide you a platform to share these more broadly. And likewise, we're always happy to learn from you. So I think with that, I open it up for questions. And
Thank you. So we will open it up to questions. If you have a question, please pop it in the chat with everyone bar, and we will get to as many questions as we can in the next 10 minutes. So we're going to run through them at speed. The first question I have for you is one I prepared, which is, I guess, some of the policy areas that New South Wales Government works on are very kind of complex and contested. There's not a clear line of sight into a particular choice of policy outcome that the government has settled on. What's the role of business cases in that type of scenario?
So can you repeat the first part of the question? So, so what's the role of business cases in a complex environment, or
complex, uncertain, particularly where there's contested views on the framing of the problem or contested views on the potential solutions?
I think the role of the business case, thank you for that question. It's obviously very relevant. I think the role of the business case can be massive. Ultimately, it's not something that we put together, a document that we submit to Treasury that allows us funding, but ultimately it's what is the content of the document and what is the process that drove that document, who was involved in that. I think for one thing, COVID-19 and all this uncertainty related to the pandemic and to the different challenges, for that matter, that we are facing in our society these days, is how necessary it is to be understanding of each other and to be understanding of each other's business and to be understanding of each other's needs. And I think the business case is ultimately a platform to be able to engage people and to be insightful and curious about about the different insights and aspects that they bring to defining a problem. So I think the role of business cases is massive, and I can see it's only going to increase because the necessity for collaboration and is ultimately increasing, and it's especially so in times of uncertainty. But that's my view.
Thank you for talking us through that, because that's a very important point for policy professionals, I think, to try and cover that ground. Okay, so questions from the chat. Our first question is about the difference between evidence-based and evidence-informed decision making. I know Ophelia Cowell covered this a little as well in the presentation, and we've even had a suggestion on perhaps an answer to that, so I'll put that to you as well. Is evidence-informed decision making, does it mean that the evidence was available to the decision maker, and evidence-based policy means the decision maker actually used it to follow the evidence to pick the best option? Do you have the distinction between evidence-based and evidence-informed policy?
Yes. So, I mean, my perspective is totally, in my opinion, so to say. I don't know the actual definitions or whether there are any specific definitions which are out there in the research world around the utilization of these two words. But in general, what we strive in Center for Evidence and Evaluation is to collect that evidence and to the best available possibilities and to collect the best available evidence, so to say. And of course, that the intent is for that evidence to then inform decisions and to be regarded as part of the decision-making process on investments. So I know that there is a different interpretations of what's evidence-based, what's evidence-informed, that one might be diluted and the other one might be real, etc. Ultimately, what we are interested when we assess and from a user perspective as well, because I've been on the other end developing business cases, what we are interested is in the best available evidence and in the fact that the key and the most important stakeholders have been engaged, involved, and listened to when we were developing those investment proposals. I don't know whether that answers your question. I hope it does. I think you are on mute. I think you are on mute.
Question is about ILM, which I'm going to take a wild stab in the dark, means investment
logic mapping.
Yeah, logic mapping. Yep.
Yes.
Is that going to be mandatory in the future in New South Wales for the New South Wales government? Training and accreditation of practitioners.
Whether that's ever going to be made mandatory?
That's right.
I don't know the future, and I cannot say whether that's going to be a mandatory technique or not. What I know is, and what I've seen in the last 4 years that I've been in Treasury, is definitely an increased appetite for this in New South Wales. I've used it in other jurisdictions in my previous roles, and I find it a very helpful technique. As discussed, I've brought it in here. It's not part of the business case guidelines necessarily. We don't talk about it in the guidelines, but wherever possible, I encourage practitioners and whoever is working on business cases to explore methods that best suit the framing of that problem, of the problem that they are dealing with. And so if this is a method that adds value, please let us know. If you can show us examples of where you've used it and it has improved your decision making, please let us know, and then we can take it from there. I think a lot of these methods are, they basically need to be tailored to the type of problems that we're dealing with. Plan and control is perfect for some problems, but for other complex problems like wicked hard, where you solve one part of the problem and you've already realized there is 5 more out there in urgent need to be solved. I think those methods are other methods should be applied and outside of plan and control.
Great. Okay, I think we've got at least time for one more question. Can you give us, from your reviewing of business cases from within the New South Wales government, give us some, what are the 5 do's and the 5 don'ts about business cases? Well, when you see a great one, what are the, the things that you think that they've done well?
I think if I could give like one big do, is engage early with Treasury, explain what sort of problem it is that you are trying to solve, get Treasury on board, because I do believe that if we could be made part of the process early, we can add value. We can add a lot of value in that process. So the other do is invest in the case for change, in understanding and engaging the stakeholders, because that will give that I think immediately once you have that engagement process, and once you have reached out to the right people, etc., you have increased the space for change. You have increased that because you've gained acceptance and you've gained authorization. That authorization sometimes is lateral. It comes through other agencies and it comes through other stakeholders. It comes through users, etc. That gives basically strong legs to that problem. And then applying cost-benefit analysis. This is an incredibly powerful method, and I highly recommend its application to business cases, to prioritizing different options. Yeah, I think these are, for me, from my end, some of the elements that sort of increase the success of business cases.
Thank you. Tips there. Now, we're pretty much on time. We do have a few more questions, but I think we'll provide those separately to you offline, Jurita and Tegan, and you can have a look at those and get back to people perhaps independently. But I just wanted to thank you on behalf of the community of policy professionals for taking the time to speak with us today and being so prepared. Hooray, we can see you now. And explaining the links to outcomes-based budgeting, the broader context. I really like the 5-case analysis because it had broad parallels with the policy cycle, issue identification, options analysis, decision making, and the ability to implement. So I'd also like to thank Indy and Ampler for supporting the webinar today, and of course our audience for their interest and enthusiasm. We'll be back on Tuesday the 10th of November interviewing Joanne Wilkie on responding to crises and giving her practitioner's experience from both working in the Commonwealth and now in New South Wales. Lots to talk about there. So until then, take care.